All right, it is Friday, January 19th, roughly the same time, only about 5 minutes difference from when we met on Tuesday. This is episode 4 for Sundered Ages Talks, and we are now doing the Sundered Ages classless side of the spells, spellcasters, and casting topic that we touched on Tuesday.
I love mages. I just want to start with saying that I love wizards and everything, but what I don't love is when they suck. Right? That's not fun.
Yeah, that's not ideal. Quick question.
Not ideal.
Do bards count as mages?
No, they don't. Bards are bards, and they'll always be bards. Oh man, we talked about so much. Spells and spells per day, and resource. I think where we started, and it might be a good starting point for this one too, is just spells in general. So I think we had started out talking about wizards had started with one, maybe 24 spells that were like, hey, these are really good, people want these, and then filled in the gaps with garbage. You had an interesting way to combat that. Please tell us.
Okay. Well,
share your secrets.
Well, first, so obviously we keep going back to this, but there are no casting classes,
right.
No classes at all in Sundered Ages. So instead, there are just skills that a player character would take, or an NPC, that give them access to spells. Examples break down into some of the tropish, likely common ones. Alteration, anima, which is like positive and negative energy. A lot of the things that you traditionally think of for priests or clerics would fall under that. Conjuration, druidic types, elementalism, which is sort of in old school that would have been referred to as evocation, illusion, and one other one that I'm still working on. I don't know how balanced it'll be, and may not make the initial 1.0 cutoff, since I keep being told by people to stop adding new things. But so those are the skills that we have, and rather than having, okay, here's a wizard, they have 8, levels worth of spells for their 20 levels of the class. And there are maybe probably not 24, somewhere, say 18, dozen and a half, spells that are really worth taking that are going to get cast 90% of the time. And no matter what kind of wizard you're playing, like an individual wizard, sorcerer, whatnot, may not use all of these themselves, but they're going to draw from the same pool of central spells. So instead, because there's no classes, if you are someone that has put points into or focus into conjuration, you automatically have cut through the fat on this list of this unnecessarily long list of spells, wherein you are no longer being considered balanced by available spells, by spells that you're never going to use. All the spells that fall under conjuration are conjuration spells, which could be anything from summoning, things like weapons and armor, things like bubbles of air, standard things, elementals, some evocation light kind of spells. But each of these serves a different purpose, with the exception of each tier of spells that you go up has higher level versions of things like summoning elementals, because you're not going to use that same spell that you had at level 1 when you're level 12, unless your goal is, all I need is, an elemental to do some sort of task. Like for combat, it might not be a thing, but if you're in the right situation, maybe what you just need is a low-level water elemental, right, to perform some menial task. Like something has to be pushed, a puzzle has to be done in the water. It's actually easiest just to send, that thing has to be pushed or moved or pulled or whatnot. We'll just send bubbles, right? most of the spells, there's generally about 10 or 11 per tier per skill. So for a Conjurationist, there's a full list of about 45 spells that they have access to. If all you ever put points into as far as casting was Conjuration, you would still have 45 spells. All of them are worth using. All of them are only spells that you get access to as a Conjurationist. You're not having this huge list of spells that you're never going to use. Within the realm of Conjuration, you might be a person that maybe doesn't plan on ever doing things related to the undead, but that's not a huge chunk of it. You could even be a Conjurationist and not want to be someone that that summons the elementals. You would still have more than 80% of the spells available to that skill would be valuable to you. And it's the same with all of the spell skills, in that each of these individually has 40 to 50 spells right out of the gate in like the 1.0 book. And 40 to 50 spells is more than any person generally was going to ever have written down on their spell sheet for a character anyways.
Yeah.
And that spell sheet for like a 3rd or 3.5 or, whatever edition, fourth edition didn't have spells. It just had weapon damage plus mod.
Yeah.
These are spells you're going to use.
Yeah. So you get all these spells right out the gate. Do you feel like could that be too overwhelming for new players? Because there's not a limitation on this at the start of the game, or do you think it'll be easier for people? Sort of a leading question, but do you think it'll be easier because they'll just find the things they like and stick with it?
I think it'll be fairly easy, like the other skills, like for combat, for weapons, armor, that sort of thing. It's spelled out pretty plainly exactly what a spell skill does, and the spells, they have some flavor text because I'm into that sort of thing. But they're very straightforward. This spell does this thing. If and there's a list of the spells with a basic generalized idea of, what this spell does. If you want to play that type of character, you could take a quick look at that and go, okay, like this is something worth investing in. And if you want to play a character that's going to, maybe you're not going to be a full caster. Maybe you want to be a paladin type character, or you want to be an assassin that is going to drop a certain amount into alteration to give themselves like physical enhancements, or illusion to give themselves some stealthiness, or even conjuration. Maybe you're a person that thinks that the best way to go undetected is that you don't even bring your own weapons to the fight, right? You summon them on hand, whether that's a bow and arrows or a knife or whatnot. There's no tools left over. The police, the town guard, when they find you, they don't even have a weapon on you. There's nothing to be found with like fingerprints, that sort of thing. You could tie these spell skills into a lot of other builds that are not in any way, considered like standard wizard type characters.
So my question is, we have all these spells right out the gate. Let's say for someone who wants to be like the classic damage, glass cannon, are there better spells for things like that? Or, is there a sense of balance? Like, let's say, for instance, I would always choose things like Fireball and Phantasmal Killer. Are there still things like that where people can specialize, or is there more of a balance of in between? Where do they fall, I suppose, on the spectrum?
Okay, well, as far as skills, the spell skill that what you're looking to do is damage, and that's your primary goal, is just to kill things like with fire. You're probably going to take a bend towards elementalism, which has the sort of wizard spells and flavor that I think a lot of people go to wizard for. People that have been playing, a wizard or sorcerer for a decade or two probably have merged in instead to like going for the save or die type spells for illusion or alteration. They've got some sort of magical combination type thing. But right at the start, a lot of people would go for elementalism. If you were playing Skyrim and you wanted to kill things with magic, you would go for, I forget, is it
Evocation.
Evocation, or whatever it's called in that
It
game.
was. I think it was evocation. Yeah.
So within that, you still have spells. You have spells that can do roughly the same amount of damage. That you might say, like, oh, there's some overlap. Like, okay, so very first tier of spell, something that you could have access to at level 1 if you were spending points in elementalism. Arctic Spray. It's your standard, it's a 10-foot cone. It does, a somewhat meager amount of damage. It reaches the cap on its damage fairly quickly. And that's to keep it, because it does, the spells generally, their damage or their effects do scale, so they're better. Low-level spells are still better if you're a higher-level caster, but they don't compete with the next tier up directly, like for damage. So you might say, okay, well, so the Arctic Spray, it does damage, and it does it in a small area of effect. But you'd ask, okay, so what's the difference between that and, like, if another spell here, Lightning Pulse? Lightning Pulse, instead of doing a 10-foot cone, is a ray spell. Instead of frost damage, it's lightning damage. You hit the target, and then the target that you're hitting, there's no, like, concentrating to do this for extra rounds. When you hit the target, they make their will save. If the target fails the will save, then this spell pulses and hits a nearby target, and then has a chance to go on again the next round. Now, if someone is brand new to D&D, right? They've never played a wizard before. They might not be keen on, like, in some situations frost damage might be better, in some situations fire or lightning. You wouldn't bring ice to an undead fight, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But if you're new, you'd go, okay, this spell does 9 damage, that spell does 9 damage. What's the difference? You could clearly see, okay, if I don't want to get in close, like, the cone it's 10 feet, but that's still closer than maybe some people want to be. So you're willing to take, I'm only guaranteed to hit one person with this spell. I might hit 2, but I can cast this spell from more than 100 feet away. And then the fire spell for that tier is slightly less damage than the other ones, which in general, it's a more area of effect spell. It's in the middle range. It does slightly less damage. It can be concentrated. And it's generally the trend that you see specifically within elementalism, that each tier will have spells that focus long range, middle range, short range. The secondary effects on those spells will make them situationally useful. And even at higher levels, say you could cast the 3rd tier of elementalism spells. As you get better at elementalism, lower level spells actually become cheaper to cast. So rather than, it's regular sort of traditional D&D simulates this in a way in that as you gain levels, you get more spells per day, right? Especially the low level spells. So whereas at level 1, you might be able to squeeze out 5 or 6 castings of your low level spell. By the time you're 2-3 tiers into casting, you could probably put out 15 or 20 of those same spells, and by the time you're a master at this skill, these things basically cost nothing. They don't cost nothing, you couldn't cast them infinitely, but they're so cheap that within the confines of combat, where, most combats are not ever going to go beyond like a 10-round kind of thing, like everyone will be dead, there'll be blood everywhere, unless it's a dragon, at which point either it had too much health or it missed too often. But within that 10-round thing, casting these low-level spells, you couldn't expend all your mana. And then, of course, the spells themselves are varied sort of into categories of a direct, single target, close, multi-target, medium range, AoE. But then within that spell skill, there are also feats that, spice up if you're doing fire damage, if you're doing shock damage. Do you use range spells? Do you use touch spells? Will you make the DC higher? These sorts of things. So you could be an elementalist, and despite the fact that you've got 45 spells to choose from by the time you're a master, and someone else would have the same thing if they also mastered in elementalism, but with the feats that you take and the way you want to play the character, you could still play these two characters in a different way before you even take into consideration that all your other skills might be different. Like, you might have gone elementalism and then illusion. They might have gone elementalism and then anima. So, like, they're killing people, but then they're also raising other people from the dead. Or they're elementalism and they're ranged. Maybe they, use their bow at range, and then it's only when they get close they use sort of like the shotgun type spells. And there's no penalty for it. Like, they didn't have to wait until level 5 or level 7 and be an elf to become an arcane archer to get some sort of middle ground thing where they could do the two things they wanted to do to begin with. You could just do those two things. Those could be the things that your character specializes in.
Yeah. So, and you had said mana. Is that the fix to spells per day? Is that the equivalent?
That is the fix. Rather than, all over the place. Even now in 5th edition, you have this. I think of it as a problem, but this 1 per day, 2 per day kind of thing.
Right.
You see it in spells. You see it in abilities. I've never liked it because I could understand like a machine or something that took 24 hours to complete one rotation, or you could use it once and now it's overheated and it has to wait, or even maybe a magical device that like it pulls in energies from around it. You can use it once per day and then it's out. But a player character, it always came across as a little weird. Like, I can do this once per day. Well, what if I take like a 6-hour nap? Well, once per day. And then various editions were like, well, if you take a 6-hour nap, you make a roll, and did you get rested, and whatever. Mana was our fix to that. Health, stamina, mana determine what you were doing in combat. Health, are you alive? Stamina, are you still conscious? As in, like, if your stamina reaches 0, you're going to pass out just from overexertion. Stamina is used for everything from running to any sort of physical attack, and even with casters, they have an ability to dip into stamina rather than just mana for casting spells, but they can overexert themselves doing this and knock themselves unconscious, which is always fun. But mana, because of the way the system works here, mana has turned out, I think, to be better than just a standard spells per day sort of setup, because now you're making the decision as the player character whether you want to expend your mana doing, your most powerful spells, your least powerful spells. There's no taking feats to gain the ability to drop a higher level spell for a lower level spell, or take a lower level spell and now meta magic it up 1 level to add an effect to it. No. You have tier 1 spells, they cost this amount. You have tier 2 spells, they cost this amount. And then all of those are reduced over time as you become better at that skill.
Okay.
So mana, it's regenerated based on what your casting stat is. So specifically for this, like, it generally is based on wisdom. The higher your wisdom, the faster you gain back mana. And you can't gain it back in combat, because you have to be able to just sit down and rest. But outside of combat, a really high wisdom character could quickly regain enough mana to cast, a middling spell if they had 10, 20, maybe 30 minutes to sit down, rather than having to sleep 8 hours to get that one spell back because they already cast a level 4 spell, in that combat, and now they have to wait till the next day to do it again.
Wow. So we can more or less cast more often. There's more spell types, in a sense that there's fire, ice, frost, whatever, all those different things. Conjuration, illusion, all of them, they're their own different things. So there's different types of mages, and they're not as just murder like bound, like glass cannon type dealios. So I guess my question is, how are they not just overpowered? Like, they sound really great. Like, just there's a lot of option. They're not too squishy. There's a huge amount of utility. You can cast not necessarily more, but more often, in the sense that you don't have to worry about the breaks in between. So it's actually more fun to play. And maybe in our next talk, we can talk about fighter characters and things like that, and how they have ways around just getting, reamed by magic. But they sound really amazing. Are there any downsides to being a mage? Are they still like, the rogue was always the mage killer type thing? They just sound so good. It's hard to find a way in. Yeah.
I want to.
And you said there's something about you can pass out if you go too hard.
Yeah. So, for example, a brand new character level 1 that is going to be, a caster. And again, there's no classes, but say they've decided they're going to be doing anima. They're going to be a priest type character or a necromancer or whatnot. And they pick a race that has maybe a bonus to mana as a starting stat rather than health or stamina. And then they decide, okay, I'm going to set wisdom as one of my higher stats because wisdom determines what my mana and mana regeneration is. And so they might start the game with 30, or tops you could possibly get would probably be, I think, like 35 at level 1. If they're casting one of their tier 1 rather than tier 0 spells, it's still going to run them out of about 16 mana. The most powerful spell they can cast at that level is going to eat up roughly 50% of the mana they have available on hand.
Oh, wow.
Now,
okay, yeah.
It sounds, you might think like, okay, well, now that sounds like they get less spells per day. Well, at level 1, the spell that they're going to be casting is one that, say for, let's see, anima. A cleric, or someone using anima, could heal someone on their team, or harm an undead, or do a negative energy damage to a living creature, for upwards of, depending on what their relevant stats are, like wisdom, upwards of 15 to 20 points of damage. If they decided they were going to build themselves specifically around that sort of thing. 15 to 20 points of damage doesn't mean anything to someone that doesn't know like what the starting health is. Starting health and mana are roughly the same. Like, if you specialized more in one, it might be higher, but the average starting health for a character is between 25 and 30. So, yeah, you might spend half the mana that you have available in that fight. You might have to sit down for an hour to get the mana back, but you could take someone from full health down, say if they had 25 and you're doing 15 to 20, you could dish out 70% of their health just in one spell. And so you spending half of your available mana pool doesn't sound like that's coming at too heavy a cost. On top of that, like I had said, people using casting skills that have specialized in them in some way, meaning they've invested enough to be able to cast tier 1 spells, gain the ability to dip into their stamina pools that would normally be used for things like swinging weapons, running, combat maneuver type things, and basically grab some of that stamina and use it as backup mana. So if you had 25 stamina and 30 mana, you might be able to squeeze 3 castings of that spell out, with the third casting knocking your character unconscious from physical overexertion, but you could get that spell out. It sounds maybe a little weird. I think when people watch this, they'll probably relate to it, though. Is we have already had in the games that we play moments where it actually has turned sort of into even a more enjoyable story moment when your caster does that like clutch spell knocks himself unconscious, like, in the process of it, and it's like, oh man, like, we wouldn't have won if they hadn't done that. And just the fact that you could see the result that it had on their character immediately added it added a sort of emotional weight to the action that you don't
Hmm.
have when the wizard goes or the cleric goes like, oh guys, sorry, I'm out of all my spells.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to pull the crossbow out from now on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you see that at the end of movies, right? The hero like literally exerting themselves by sheer will and passing out after the fight. Like, I'm pretty sure Harry Potter did it 80 times.
Oh
So,
sure, but yeah, so it
yeah.
adds something that, again, uh, the point of the classless system at its root is to give the characters an organized system to play within, but as many choices as are possible in a relatively
Hmm.
balanced way within that system. Also, I'm sure, we've been looking at this thing for hundreds, if not thousands of hours at this point. I know, at least, at the very least, I have. You would probably be second on that list.
Hmm.
Some of these, when other people when it gets into the average person's hands and they're playing with it, they might find that the way that their DM runs the game or the way that their group plays, that one spell skill might end up seeming stronger than the others for the kind of games they play. Well,
Hmm.
the at the very worst, that skill is still available for everyone. And unlike a regular game of maybe D&D 3.0, 3.5, Pathfinder, 4th edition, 5th edition, whatever, a good spell skill doesn't mean that everybody that didn't start as a wizard, for that spell is out of luck. If it's really going to be something that important to the campaign, to the game, for balance, it's still a skill that's available to every player character that's ever created.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there is no, you made your character, now you're locked out of these options, or you made your character, now you're going to have to multi-class and, or cross-class or do all these sorts of things. No. You look at it, you say, wow, like, that seems really great. I'd be willing to invest a couple levels to be able to do that. And when you level up, you just start putting points into that thing. Now you can cast those spells. Now, the person that's been doing it longer is going to have access to better spells. But if you really think that it has an edge up. We had a campaign back in Pathfinder where we had a group of 4 paladins because it was fun. I could see a game where the DM was running some sort of like, undead apocalypse, or even just like
Hmm.
a vampire hunter kind of thing, where every player in the group would have some level of investment in anima
Yeah.
specifically. Like,
Yeah.
okay, so what that would mean lore wise or fluff wise or background wise is all these people are trained by the church or the temple or whatnot. And they'd still be completely different characters outside of this one skill they've taken. And even within that skill, they still are likely choosing different feats to accent the things that it's capable of
Hmm.
doing.
Yeah. That's awesome. Let me see. Was there any other spells per day? Gone. Spells per level, spells per skill point sort of deal. And classes are gone. We use mana. The mage isn't balanced. It's removed and redone. I think we covered everything.
Yeah, I think we did. Well, I mean, we touched on bits and pieces of this on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Anyways, we just tried to not make it the focus. But I know at future points we're going to come back. At some point, we'll probably do an
Oh yeah.
individual show on each one of the spell skills by themselves, what they do, the kinds of characters that people might make, especially once we have questions, coming
Oh
in
yeah. Yeah.
in regards to how does this balance against this, or how would you make this kind of character. Uh, but it really is. It's as straightforward as it can be. All the rules involving the casting of spells, the way mana and stamina works, they all fit on about 2 pages of the player's handbook as it stands right now. It's
Mm.
very plain text. I don't. Anyone that knows how to read and do uh, basic addition and subtraction math could grasp the way this spell system works, and yet it has more options open to the person making a character in it
Hmm.
than any other D20 system does to date.
It's a bold statement, but I believe it because I've seen it.
Yeah, well, you've seen it, and as we get further
played it.
along and we start getting test groups out there that can give their own views on these things, good and bad, because criticism is probably what's going to help the most at this point, coming back on what we can do to make the system better. But really, I don't think another system has solved these problems the way that Sundered Ages has, and I'm looking forward to getting it into people's hands so that they can see that as well.
Any teaser on what we're talking about next week? Do we know yet?
I'm not 100% sure. I had the list right around here, but I don't see it.
Well, they'll have to be surprised then.
Yeah. It will be a surprise. Although, you did mention fighting classes, so it might be worth transitioning over to that to talk about the fighting skills and how they relate.
You had talked about stamina briefly. Maybe we can talk a little bit about stamina, how that plays a role into the differential actions, because I know one big thing that got removed in 5th edition, not to go too far into it because we're pretty much done here, but one of the things that got removed in 4th or 5th edition was a lot of the attack movements, so CMB, CMD, a lot of that stuff got either removed or replaced. And
I saw that. It's a little confusing to me, having never sat down and played like a full 5th edition game to see.
I think they were skills, so instead of having Bull Rush, like only fighters did it or something like that, it was very different.
And there's weird abilities where you can add a feat or magical ability called like Sentinel, where once per day you hit and you knock down, but you also do damage, and it's weird. It seems like they've taken away some of the options that used to be there.
So maybe we'll talk about that next week and how that ties into stamina.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be good. More so than the fighting skills. I think stamina is a good place to go.
Yeah.
And then we can do fighting skills after that if nothing better comes up.
All right. I'll see you all next week.
All right, we'll be back on Tuesday.